Today's daf we're going to be learning is Gittin daf Kaf Daled. We are going to get started from the Mishna quick review on Kaf Gimel Amud Bet. Okay, I want to say before I start, because I forgot to mention this week all the extra content on the Hadran site this week, so I'll give a little bit of a background on all the interesting content that went up. One is Shuli Mishkan about names, about how people named people in those days, and all sorts of interesting things about the history of names and within Judaism. And the second is, on second thought, all about Sefer and where Sefer appears in other places. We talked about the two different interpretations. Does it mean actually a book, or really doesn't mean a book, but a parchment? Or does it mean the telling of a story? And Rabbanit Climber talks both about this and about where other places in Tanakh Sefer appears, what it means, an interesting shiur about that. And Bezrat Hashem, I hope today will go up. Just came in last night, but has to be processed. I hope we have time. Otherwise, if not before Shabbat, then at least on Sunday. Gefet this week, which is already up in Hebrew, about very interesting shiur about yesterday. Remember, I mentioned about the topic. So it's good when this comes up. I said this is very interesting issue, which is our Mishna talked about a kol sh'rein lahavia to get, which was shaliach laholacha. And then the Gemara asked a question about the slave and said, can a slave be a shaliach likabel, to accept the get on behalf of the woman? And we said they learned it from the Mishna, even though the Mishna was talking about the man's shaliach, and this was talking about the woman's shaliach. And the woman and the man's shaliach is different because they're doing different actions. One is to bring a get to the woman, and one is to act in place of the woman. And there's all differences because also one can be done against her will, and the other one has to be done with intent. So anyway, Rashi had said there, it's obviously they're the same. Okay, which was a strange thing to say, although it does make sense in the context of the Mishnah. So in the Shiur of Gefet this week from Drisha, they have there's a whole discussion among the Rishonim about what exactly is Shalech L'Olachan Kabbalah the same? Are there differences? If there are differences, which way did the differences go? Which is a more stronger shlichut? Or anyway, there's a whole shiur there about that. Hopefully we'll go up soon. Okay, now we're back to our Mishnah. So our Mishnah is talking about these 5 women who aren't generally believed. Right? We said, what's the concern? The concern is they want to ruin the life of this woman they don't like because she's married to their son, their whatever. And again, not to say this always happens, but sometimes there's bad blood and they might really want to get them out of the picture, get them forbidden to the person that, right, their relative, and kind of ruin their life because they'll already be married to someone else. And they'll say, by the way, you were really still married to the first husband and you can't be married to any of them. And the question is, in which case, right, when it comes to your husband died, it's very easy to ruin someone's life because the husband's really not dead and they just testify that he is. In this case, it's a little more complicated. And then we had a whole thing because our Mishnah says they actually are believed because they're bringing a get in hand. They have something written. Then we saw a braita that says they're not believed to bring a get. And then we decided, Rav Yosef and Abaye each gave different reasoning, but that we're going to distinguish between one who brings a get from abroad and one who brings a get from Israel. So if you bring a get from abroad, Rav Yosef says, you have to say, b'fanei nechtam, you have to testify. We don't allow these women to testify, so no. If you're just bringing the get, so all it is the get, and therefore you're believed. Abaye says it's exactly the opposite. Because if you bring a get from abroad, once you get to court and you say, b'fanei nechtam, the court stamps it, and the husband can't, right? I don't know if they really had stamped it then, but they basically say the get is a good get, and the husband cannot come and say anything anymore. So meaning it's a done deal, complete. It's specifically in Israel we have to worry, because in Israel, since it doesn't need to go through the court, the husband theoretically could come later and complain and say this get's not a good get. And therefore, there's more of a concern that these women would lie in that case and bring a false get to kind of mess things up. So that's where we left off. Now we're about 6 lines from the bottom of Kaf Gimel Amud Bet. We're going to read a braita that supports Abaye's reading. That again, when we say these women aren't believed, when we say in the Mishnah the women are believed, we're talking about when they bring a get from abroad to Israel. So now we'll see a braita where it's clear from there, although we'll have to wait a minute or two to get there. Rabbi Shimon ben, so Tanya kavatei Abaye, braita to support Abaye. What we're going to do, by the way, right now is we're going to show a braita to support Abaye. We're going to show our Mishnah supports Abaye, and then we're going to have to say, how on earth does Rav Yosef read our Mishnah? So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Rabbi Akiva. Remember, there were two halachot in our Mishnah. One was about these women that are believed, even though they're generally not believed in other cases for this woman. Then we talked about the woman herself can bring her own get as long as she says b'fanei nechta b'fanei nechta. So now we say the following. A woman, the second halach in our Mishnah, is believed to bring her own get. How do we know? He's going to connect those two halachot. Kal v'chomer mi kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Uma nashim she'amru chachamim ein ne'emanot lomar meit ba'ala ne'emanot lavi gita. When the chachamim said that these other women can't say that the husband's dead, but yet they're believed to bring a get, well, then here comes our kal v'chomer. A woman herself is believed. Remember, we learned this. Why does she believe? Because we assume that she's going to not leave any stone unturned, and basically check very thoroughly to make sure. And therefore, she is believed to say her husband died, because she's only going to mess herself up if it's not true. So if she is believed to say meit ba'ala and these other women aren't, and yet those women are believed to bring a get, obviously she's believed to bring her own get. And now, if you're going to learn a kal v'chomer from me, myself, I could bring my own get from my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, all those people. Well, just like when those women bring the get, they have to say b'fanei nechta b'fanei nechtam. That's our proof. Because why are they saying b'fanei nechta b'fanei nechtam unless they're bringing it only from chutz la'aretz? So there's your proof for Abaye. We could stop right here, even though we're not going to because we're mid-sentence. But that's your proof that when we said they're believed, if we're going to have to choose, right now, it doesn't, we already showed that there are two different approaches, but the two different approaches we're saying just reflects a different reality, not two different opinions. So if we accept that there's two different realities, one is Israel, one is chutz la'aretz, and they'll be believed in one and not the other, it's clear from this braita that they're believed specifically when they're bringing from abroad, because in this braita it has them saying the words b'fanei nechta b'fanei nechtam, which only need to be said bringing it from abroad. So that's our proof, but we're going to continue our sentence because we're mid-sentence. If we're learning that I can bring my own get from these other women who are believed, well then, just like they have to say b'fanei nechta b'fanei nechtam, likewise I have to say so the topic of that Mishnah was really a woman bringing her own get, but because they compared it to this other, they learned it out from the other case and compared it, we can prove Abaye from here. I'm a Rav Ashi, and now comes, I told you, we're going to prove it, number one, from a braita, then we're going to support it also from the language of our Mishnah. Matnitin namidaika, we can also infer it from our Mishnah, Rav Ashi says. Dekatani haisha atzma mevia gita, ubilvad shetei tzricha lomar b'fanei nechta b'fanei nechtam. It said it explicitly in our Mishnah that when a woman brings her own get, now it wasn't talking about the 5 women in that part of the Mishnah, but the assumption is if the second part of the Mishnah was talking about a woman who brings her get from abroad to Israel, then the first part of the Mishnah was also been talking about someone who brings a get from abroad to Israel. So that's another good proof for Abaye. Shmami now. So we can infer that. For Rav Yosef, now we have to go back to Rav Yosef. Well, how does he read the Mishnah? Reisha b'sefer b'chutz la'aretz, mitziat ba'aretz. The Reisha, okay, what's the Reisha? The Reisha is the previous Mishnah. Okay, let's go back to the previous Mishnah. What was the previous Mishnah? Hakol ksherim. We're going to have a zigzag according to the Rav Yosef. We're going to have the Mishnah before, which we view obviously as a continuum, even though it's on the previous page, right? In the Mishnah, it's all organized together. So we're going to start with a get that was brought from outside of Israel. In a minute, we'll see how we know that. We're going to move to a get that, I'm sorry, I hope I said it right. We're going to start with a get that was from outside of Israel brought to Israel. Then the second case is these women who are only in Israel. Remember, that's what we said. It's Israel where you don't need to say b'fanei nechta b'fanei nechtam. That's exactly the case for Rav Yosef because they don't need to testify. That's why we believe them. All they need is the get in hand. And that's why we'll believe them because they're not actually saying anything. If they say something, we don't trust them. But they're bringing a get signed with signatures. We'll believe them. And then we go back to a get brought from abroad. That's a big zigzag. That doesn't make any sense. Well, how do we know the Mishnah, this Mishnah from before was written about someone who brought a get from abroad? Because if you remember, we said, anyone can bring a get other than we asked the question about a summa, what's wrong with a blind person? And in the end, we said, because they can't say, in front of me it was written, in front of me. It was signed because they can't see. So we proved that Mishna was talking about a get being brought from abroad. So again, Reisha v'Seifa. So first part, last part, all in Chutz La'aretz. Mitziata in the middle part in Israel. That seems so weird. So Gemara says, yes, don't worry about it. Reisha v'Seifa b'chum mitziata ba'aretz. Yes, it's a little zigzaggy, but you can say that. Mimai. Well, you have to have some sort of proof that you're right about this. So how can Rav Yosef prove he's right? Again, not proven under Abaye, but at least support his reading. Ma ben get lemita. This is a quote from our Mishnah. When it said those 5 women are believed, it says, what's the difference between get and they're testifying to his death? Shaktav mochiach. Velo katane shaktav upet mochiach. What did it say there? Why are they believed? Because they have a get in hand. And what proves the divorce? The writing, and not the writing and what they say. If it was what they say, right, then it would include from abroad, because they have to say here it says it's just because in this you could, again, it's all a matter of interpretation, but you could read this as because it's written and that's all you have here is the writing, therefore they're believed. That's the way Rav Yosef will read it, in which case it proves that it's a case where there is no b'fanei nefta. Again, doesn't prove it 100%. It's just a way of reading. Now we're going to move from here till the end of the chapter, which ends close to the end of Amud Aleph. We're going to talk about this case of the woman bringing her own get. We really didn't talk about this, but what on earth are we talking about here? A woman brings her get. Now, we actually did talk about this earlier in the Masechet, and we explained it a little bit like this, but we're going to get much more into the details of what exactly is going on here. We have a big problem because what does it say? The woman brings her get, presumably from abroad to Israel, and she can do that as long as she says, b'fanei nefta, b'fanei nefta. Now, why on earth does she need that? Isha michimata gita liyada igra shale. She's already divorced, right? Normally, a shaliach brings a get from abroad, brings it to a court, says b'fanei nefta, b'fanei nefta. They validate the get by that statement. They give the woman the get, and she's divorced, right? The messenger gives her the get, and she's divorced. The b'fanei nefta happens at the moment the divorce is being done. Well, in this case, the husband gives the get to the wife abroad. She's already divorced at that point. Why does she have to come to Israel after that and say b'fanei nefta? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The whole point we've been talking about people bringing gets is to get the get to the woman who's far away. This whole situation makes no sense. And really what doesn't make sense is she should be divorced from the moment she gets the get. So why is she not divorced from the moment she gets the get? And why is the divorce only effective when she gets to Israel? So Amar Rav Huna. Now, why someone would do this? No idea. Okay, it's very hard to understand this. But the fact is, Amar Rav Huna be'omel. It's a case where the man said to her, and this isn't any case where the husband gives a get to a wife. He normally gives it to her, and the get is done. But in this case, he said to her, "Lo titgarshi bo ela b'fnei beitin ploni." He says, "This is going to be your get," and this is how we understood the case previously when we mentioned it. This will be your get, right? Don't get divorced with this until you show up at this court. In other words, it was important to him that she go to that court and get the divorce then. So that's why. But then they say, now remember, if she's supposed to say b'fanei nefta, that means, okay, going back to what shaliach kabbalah, shaliach holacha, we're going to get into all this again. Remember, shaliach holacha is the one who brings the get to the woman, a messenger of the husband. The shaliach kabbalah is the one who accepts the get on behalf of the woman. She could send a messenger. Now, in this case, it seems like he's sending her as a shaliach laholacha. Okay, so first we don't exactly talk in languages of shlichut, or maybe we do, and basically it's saying you're going to be my messenger. Go bring it to this court, and then you'll get divorced with it. So the Gemara says that doesn't make any sense to say this is the situation because kimat yahatan igar shala. Still, she doesn't need to say b'fanei nefta. If he said, "Here's your get. This will be your get when you get to this court," basically, it's not shlichut. He didn't send her as a messenger. He gave her a get upon condition. We've seen this before. We're going to see it through many situations throughout Masechet Gittin. You can give a get and say, "This will be your get in 30 days. This will be your get when you do the following. This will be." So basically, it's a condition. He says, "This will be your get when you get to this court." As soon as she gets to the court, it's her get. She still shouldn't need to say, "B'fanei nefta, b'fanei nefta." That's only a messenger. She's not a messenger. So that explanation doesn't work. So he said in his name, it must be where the husband said, okay, now we're going to get into shlichut. You're my messenger. Now it's going to be tricky. What's the tricky part? How can she both be a messenger to bring the get and accept the get? Because she has to switch at some point, and as soon as she switches, she can't be both giving and accepting, right? At the same time, she's one person. I was thinking it's like when you have a double in a movie, when you or in a movie, we use the same character in two, and you film it so that they can appear on the screen at the same time. One actor can play two roles at the same time. You can only do that when you're filming, and you can cut and split things. But here, it's much more tricky. So now he says the following: this is a way to do it. When you get there, put it on the ground, and then you'll end your shaliach laholacha, okay, by putting it on the ground, and then you'll be yourself and pick it up, okay? So first, you're going to bring the get as my messenger. Then you're going to put it on the ground, you're going to pick it up. But major problem with this one. This is no different than the following case, which is the husband says to her, pick up your get off the floor. Now, I'm a Rava about this case. Rava says, what's the problem with pick up your get off the floor? The problem is, it says, v'natam biyada. He's supposed to give it to her, not that she's supposed to take it. So if he says, which would have worked in terms of her not functioning as two people at the same time, but it doesn't work because there's no such thing as her not getting it straight from the shaliach laholacha. And since she can't, because she can't be both people at once, we have a problem. Because he can't say, put it on the floor when you get there, finish your shlichut laholacha, now become yourself and pick it up. That doesn't work. That's not a way of receiving a get. It's not a kosher way to receive a get. Ella, so maybe it's the amrla have shaliach laholacha adimatitatam. He says to her, listen, be a shaliach laholacha until you get there. V'chimatitatam have a shaliach lekabbalah v'kabliyat gittin. Now you're going to see this still doesn't resolve it, but he says, and then when you get there, you're going to switch to become a shaliach kabbalah and take your get from, well, the problem is from nobody because there's no more messenger of the husband anymore, which is going to be the problem. No, it's a strange language they use here. And it seems like this is a problem with shlichut in general, although interestingly, this concept never comes up I actually saw, I was looking up a little bit about this concept because I thought it was a strange line and hard to understand. And I looked up, I found an article on the VBM, the Virtual Beit Midrash of Yeshivat Har Etzion, and of Rav Yarkan, who I used to study with him many years ago. And he starts off the article exactly with that. He says, this sounds like, at the simple reading is, this is some concept that exists in shlichut in general, but the only place we find it is here, and another sugya that relates to get, and it doesn't appear in shlichut in general ever. So it's a good question where exactly this comes from. Anyway, this is also, there's many different interpretations of what this is, what this means, but we'll go with Rashi for simplicity, and maybe I'll mention one other one. But he says the following. This is not good shlichut. Why? Because the shaliach laholacha, okay, according to Rashi, lo chazra shlichut etzel habal means, according to Rashi, I'll even read it inside. Rashi says, shaliach lo mikre ella, you can only be a shaliach if, and this is why Rav Yarkan says is a good point, which is whoever said this, where do we see this elsewhere? But maybe it's sort of just obvious that what does it mean to be, because maybe it's just the definition of what it means to be a shaliach. You have to be able to go back and say, I completed the shlichut. Right? Maybe it's just obvious. You have to complete it. Now here she's not completing it because, right, she can't go back and say, I did it, because she switched to be a shaliach kabbalah before she actually did it. So she can't actually say that. Okay? Rabbeinu Kreskos explains it a little bit differently, that basically once she gets to the court, her status changes, so she doesn't ever finish her shlichut. Okay, so again, I'm going to put it out there. This is a hard phrase to really understand, and because it makes it sound like this is something that applies to messengers in general, and we don't even see where it applies, it even begs the question even more. But so now they say the following: Da'amrala, let's try another option. Okay, you can see they're really struggling with figuring out the reality of this case, which makes sense because the first time we saw this also, we said, why would a woman be bringing her get from abroad to Israel? It doesn't make any sense. Da'amrala, heve shaliach laholacha adimatita. So it's very similar. He starts off saying the same thing. Be my shaliach leholacha. Take my get to Israel. And when you get there, right, till you get there, v'chimatit hatam, when you get there, shave shaliach lekabbalah. This is a little bit strange, but when you get there, this at least will resolve our problem. Appoint someone to accept the get on your behalf. So she'll continue being the shliach leholacha, finish her shlichut, and there'll be a new shliach kabbalah accepting it on her behalf. It'd be a little weird why she would have to appoint someone to accept it, but we understand after all these questions why she needs to do that. However, this is a bit of a problem, and there's a whole different issue here, which is there's a machloket about whether, a man can make a shaliach to give the get and a woman can make a shaliach to accept the get. That we know. The question is, when the man sends a shaliach, is she allowed to also send a shaliach? Can you have a shaliach giving a divorce to a shaliach? Now, what would be the issue? So it's an interesting issue, hard to follow, but so let's get into it. If you say this is allowed, he can send a shaliach to give to her shaliach, that's fine. Then this makes perfect sense. This case works. And now we're going to have this split into two because we're going to have two possibilities as to why you can't do this. And we're going to go through each possibility and explain why it's not relevant here, or maybe it is relevant here, we'd have a problem. But if you say a woman can't make a shaliach to get a get from the messenger of the husband, then this wouldn't work because she's a messenger of the husband, and then she appoints a shaliach to get it from the messenger of the husband. Now the question is, why is that the case, and would that apply here? So tamamai mishum deika bizayon debal v'hachabal lo kapit. If you say the reason is because it's embarrassing to the husband. Now this is a strange thing to think about. What's embarrassing to the husband? Well, if he sends a messenger to give her the get, then if she sends a messenger herself, it's embarrassing why when the messenger comes back and says, oh yeah, I gave it to your wife's messenger, they'll say, why didn't the wife show up herself? You know what? She couldn't accept the get. It's like an embarrassment to me. Okay, it's an embarrassment. He could claim that anyway. It's a little bit strange. Why would that be an embarrassment to the husband? He's not even there. And it almost sounds like a bit of a double standard. He can send the shaliach, but she can't. Like it's not a bizayon to her that he sent the shaliach. This whole thing is a little bit hard to understand. But what does make sense is that you can't claim bizayon to the husband if the husband brings the get. Why is that? Because if he brings the get and hands it to the shaliach, he can't claim later, oh, that was an embarrassment to me. Because then if it was such an embarrassment, he shouldn't have given it to the shaliach, right? Why would he give it to our messenger if it was an embarrassment for him? The fact that he gives it anyway shows he's not embarrassed by it. But if his messenger did it, and his messenger comes back and says, I gave it to our messenger, she only sent a messenger, the husband could say, wow, that's an embarrassment for me, which means, why the double standard? Because he could then say, I never really wanted, but I didn't want to give her the get in that way, which means he's canceling the get. The woman doesn't have a right to cancel the get. So even if it's an embarrassment for her, it's tough luck on her almost. So anyway, it's a little bit of a strange thing, but because of bizayon de Baal. Now here, you can't claim bizayon of the Baal because the husband told her, right, that's hachabal lo kapit. He obviously doesn't care because he said to her, go bring this, you're my messenger, and give it to another messenger. So obviously he didn't care. So that would resolve that. So we've resolved it. If you hold, you can do this, obviously, then you can do this. If you can't do it because it's bizayon of the husband, well, here you can do it. But so that only works though if you say that that's the reason. But some people say it's a different reason. Remember we saw this case. If the husband puts my get in someone else's courtyard, and then that person gives me the courtyard as a gift, that's called get habala harmike. The chatzer only becomes mine once the get is already in there, and there's no giving of the husband of the get to me, because now you have to think about it in a bit of a different way to understand why this case might cause that case. Okay, if she sends her own shaliach to get it from the shaliach of the husband, it's very similar, and you have to think about it in a particular way, but it's very similar to chatzer habala harmike. And if you see shaliach to shaliach works, you might think this works also, and this definitely doesn't work, the chatzer case. Now, why? Because the chatzer, the courtyard itself is like a shaliach, and then the owner of the field is like when he gives it to the woman, it's like he's doing the giving. Like the husband kind of said, I want this courtyard to be my messenger. The owner of the courtyard gives it to her. He's like accepting the get on her behalf. So it's not exactly, but it's somewhat similar to shaliach and shaliach. Okay. again, whether you were really confused, these things, it's a possible way to understand why shaliach to shaliach doesn't work. You can see it was hard for them to figure out why shaliach to shaliach wouldn't work, because it does kind of make sense that they can each send messengers. So anyway, if you say it's that, then ma'ika l'meimar, then that won't work as then this whole case that we just concocted wouldn't be a good case, because he can't send her to be a shaliach l'holacha and for her to appoint then another shaliach kabbalah according to this reading. So we have to reject that, at least according to this understanding of that side of the debate. So we're now going to have another answer. This is going to work. You ready? She says, be a shaliach, bring the get to abroad. When you get there, appoint a new shaliach holacha, right? The shaliach of the shaliach, the messenger of the messenger. I made you my messenger. You appoint a new messenger to take your place in this messenger. And it's okay because I told you to. Normally it's sometimes a bit of a problem, but in this case, he told her to, so it's fine. And then and then you go to the other side and you become the woman yourself and take the get from this intermediary. So that's a possibility. Alternative, second alternative. Become a shaliach l'holacha till you get there. Say the declaration in front of me, it was written in front of me, it was signed. And then once you make that declaration, then the beitin will become the shaliach l'holacha. Don't take some random third person, but the court will take that place of your job. And then and they will give it to you. And with that, we can come up with a case for what it means. Aisha is bringing the gita. Why he would do this, we still have no explanation whatsoever. But again, it could be they're really just talking theoretical, that the woman is believed to say, if for whatever reason we'd ever get into that kind of a situation. And with that, Hadran alach maybe get, we finish maybe get Batra, the second maybe get chapter, and we're moving on to a new chapter. The topic of our Mishnah, very simple. It's the topic of lishma. Everybody says the get has to be either written or signed, or maybe written and signed, getting back to the beginning of the Masechet, lishma. What does it mean, lishma? Okay, and we're going to have 4 cases where we're going to say this get is disqualified because it doesn't have lishma. And we're going to basically, the Gemara is going to go into what's unique about each of these 4 cases. Why did they have to bring all 4 of them? Where did they get each of these from the psukim? Okay, we're going to have a whole to do with that. If it's not written for the sake of this woman, it's disqualified. Okay, that's the topic sentence of the Mishnah. Now we're going to have Ketzad, 4 cases. How does this work? Number 1, he hears these sofrim, scribes saying, reading, okay, we'll see in the Gemara when we get to it, who are they reading to and for what purpose, but reading a get that says, I blah, 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 I'm reading all the details, and he hears his name, his wife's name, and the date. Okay, maybe you could make a joke, power of suggestion, right? He's like, oh, maybe I'll divorce my wife. But unlikely, more likely, he was planning to divorce his wife anyway. He happens to hear them saying his name and the wife's name. I want to take that get and use it. It's already ready. Pasula gareshbo. He obviously can't use this. It was not written for their sake. Yeter miken, more than this. Okay, meaning, right, each case is kind of building on the other. Somebody wrote a get. Someone decided to write a get for his wife. He gets a get written for him and his wife. He decides, you know what, we'll get back together. Maybe they were in therapy, they worked it out, and he says, I don't need this get anymore. He finds someone else in his town, because it has to be, because the town is already written, right? He doesn't want to lose the money that he spent on the get, or maybe she spent the money on the get, right? So anyway, he goes to sell it, let's say, or just waste of paper, he didn't like that. So Pasula Gareshbo, and he finds someone with the exact same name, living in the same town, same name with the wife. Well, he can't divorce her with it. Yeter miken, another case. Hayulo shte nashim, ushmotehen shavot. He has 2 wives with the exact same name. Katav l'garesh hagdola. He decided to divorce the older one, and then changed his mind and already had to get written. He said, "Oh, I'll use it for my second wife." Well, lo yigaresh bo taktana. If it's not confusing enough to have 2 women, right? 2 wives. All the more so to have 2 wives with the same name. Very confusing. But in any case, you can't use a get you wrote for one for the other. Yeter miken, amar le'lablal, tov le'ezo she'ertzeh. What if he said, here with the top of Amud Bet now, what if he said to the sofer, write it for whichever wife, I haven't decided, I want a divorce. One of them, maybe like too much for him, 2 wives. Again, I don't know that we really have to come up with reality of these cases. They're very theoretical, but he says, I want to divorce one of my wives, and they both have the same name. Can you write a get with my name and their name? And right, and then I'll decide later. Pasul legaresh. He can't use this. This is, by the way, a whole different thing. This is called braita. If you remember, braita is retroactive designation. Does this work? We saw this in a whole bunch of sugyot. We saw it with an eruv, for example. We saw it in a whole bunch of places. The main famous case is the one about the wine, where you have wine, you want to separate truma and masro, but you don't have anything to put it in, or it's Shabbat, and then you leave some wine at the bottom. We're going to get to that in tomorrow's daf. Tomorrow's daf is a lot about braita. Okay, so now we're going to start with our 4 cases and analyze them. First thing they're going to say is case 2 doesn't really make sense. What is it adding to case 1? Some guy decides to divorce his wife, change his mind, and then my husband says, oh, same name, same place, same this, I'll take it. Well, elaresha b'mai. So what's the difference between that and the sofer who already had this get written for someone else? It's the same thing. So they say no. Amar papa b'sofrim asuyim li'lamed askina. The sofrim, it was a case where they had a get written out just for the purposes of practice. They had done a practice get. It wasn't written for anyone in particular, as opposed to case 2, where it was actually written for someone in particular. Amar Avashi Daikanami de Katane, you can learn actually from the wording that this is the case, because it says Sofrim Maklin velo Sofrim Korim. So Rid Korim would be they read. Maklin is they read to other people, meaning they were trying to teach their other Sofrim. It was like a Sofer class. And he said, okay, here's an example. And he was reading it out. So that was totally written, right, for no purpose at all, not for the purposes of get. It was written for a purpose, but for a purpose of studying and not for a purpose of giving a get. And we'll get to the details of why that makes a difference in a few minutes. My yeter mikin. So now what's the next case? Why does it say, and all the more so? So Tana de Rabbi Yishmael. Now we're going to explain it right now, what the difference is. And it's why does it say, and more than that? Even this doesn't work. And now we're going to go through in this braita of Rabbi Yishmael, one by one, what each one adds to the other. Obviously, the one that's not even written as a divorce document is not going to work. That's the sofer writing. But even if someone else wrote this for the purposes of a get, and it actually had the intent to be used as a get, but for somebody else, that also doesn't work. The second case was written for a different man. But even when he wrote for himself, for his 2 wives, right, and wrote it for one and wants to give it to the other, even though it's done for his sake, it's not done for her sake, and that doesn't work either. Now, case number 3 wasn't written for her. But case number 4, case number 4, he actually did have both wives in mind. So theoretically, maybe you could call that lishma, because he was thinking it was him, and it was, right, it was number 1 written as a get. Number 2, it was written for him. Number 3, it was even written for her, but for her and someone else, and wasn't definitively for her. So even that is pasul. And now we're going to go through those same 4 cases again, but from my time. So what's the reason these are all pasul? First, we established what's unique about each one. Now, what's the reason? If the pasuk had only said that, what do you need about get? You need to give a sefer kritut in her hands. So hava mina, what would I say? That would exclude case number 1. Why? The first one, dilo avid l'shem kritut, because that wasn't a sefer kritut. What's a sefer kritut? A sefer that's supposed to separate between 2 people. The one that the sofer wrote just to practice on wasn't written as a sefer kritut, whereas obviously all the rest were written as a divorce document. But then you would have thought case 2, and obviously 3 and 4, that were all written with the intent to divorce maybe would work. Therefore, katav rachmana v'chatav. What do we learn from the word v'chatav? What's the subject? He needs to write it, meaning he needs to write it for his own sake. So that gets you up to case number 2, that he can't take a get written for someone else, even though it was written as his divorce document, and use it for himself. Now, if it just said, okay, we have the katav and we have the sefer kritut. So then I know the man has to write it for himself, and it has to be written as a divorce document. So we've got all that. You might have thought in the case, right, that's just to say where it's not him who wrote it, case number 2. But you would have thought you have the third case where he writes it for one of his wives. It's written by him and for him, and it's written as a divorce document. That should be fine. But then it says, right, it has to be written la for her. And therefore, this is going to work because it wasn't written for her. It was written for the other one. Lishma. The Seifa lamali. So now what's the last case coming to say? Seifa is hakamash malan de ein breira. The Seifa wants to teach you that retroactive designation doesn't work. Because if retroactive designation works, then you would have said, how does retroactive designation work? And like I said, we'll deal with it much more tomorrow. I do an action now that's unclear. I leave open 2 possibilities, but later I'm going to choose the possibility, and it's going to be as if I had chosen the possibility from the beginning. That was the thing with the Eruv. If I go this way, right, if the Chacham is coming that way, I don't know which way he's coming from. So if he's coming on that side, I want to be able to walk that way with my Tchum Shabbat. And if not, I want my Eruv to work there, right? When you find out later, can you say, oh, well, that was what I meant, right? My Eruv is, because what's an Eruv? You're basically saying, this is where I'm camped out for Shabbat in that place, and that allows me to walk farther. But you can't put 2 and go in both directions, but can you put 2 and say, later we'll see which way the Chacham is coming, and I want to go to his Shiur, can I do that? Okay, that was a case we had a breira. So again, this is to say breira doesn't work, because if it worked to work retroactively, then it would have been that the get was actually written in the Shema. So that doesn't work either. So you're asking, are they arguing about breira in general, or just in get? It seems like they're arguing about it in general, and that's what we're going to get to tomorrow's stuff. So now they're going to infer something and try to learn from here about promissory notes. Okay, the Gemara is going to say the following. When it says, this is the first statement is going to be very obvious, but it's setting up what they want to say from it. If he wrote it for the older one and then decides to marry the younger one, okay, we have Joe is married to Sue. Okay, Joe is married to Sue, number 1, and Sue, number 2. Now, he marries Sue, and he writes a divorce for Sue, number 1. But then he decides to divorce Sue, number 2. Doesn't work. But what if he decides to divorce Sue, number 1? Does it work? Of course, he wrote it lishma. Of course it works, right? He can use this get, even though he has 2 wives with the name Sue, and this is going to be the big thing. He can actually have a divorce document that has the name Sue in it and say that it belongs to the first woman and that was his intent. So, Amar Rabba Zot Omeret, from here you can learn, Shnei Yosef and Shimon Hadalig Be'ir Echat Motziim Shtar Chov Al Achirim. Totally different halacha. If I loan you money, okay, and there's 2 Michelle Farbers in the city, okay, my maiden name was Michelle Cohen. I actually went to high school with a girl, and she went to camp with me whose name was Michelle Cohen. And I used to, they used to call us in camp and say, you have a package and this, and we both run, and it turns out it would only be one of us, right? You can see why it's confusing having someone with the exact same name as you. Now, if you're in the city, and in your city, there's 2 people with the exact same name, so let's say 2 Michelle Farbers, and I have an IOU that you owe me money, okay, a promissory note. I go to you to collect, and you say, I don't owe you money, it's the other Michelle Farber, okay? Now, from our Mishna, the fact that it says that he can't divorce the younger Sue, but he can divorce the older one, that shows that even though it's theoretically, she could claim, right, this isn't me, you divorce the other woman, but it works. So you can't say that, which means that if I go to you and say you owe me money, since I have, or basically he can maybe claim later. Let's say Sue, the number 1, goes to get remarried. And he wants to say, oh, I didn't give it to you, I gave it to the other woman. Since she has the get in hand, and since I'm the one who loaned you the money, I have the shtar in my hand, we don't assume that it dropped on the floor from the other Michelle Farber and I took it. But we actually say, I can go collect money based on this document, okay? That's what we learn from our Mishnah. The fact that she can claim this is my get, and no one can argue with that and say maybe it was the other wife, which again, it doesn't say so in the Mishnah, but it's 5 in the Mishnah, this proves it. But Amar le Abaye, but if you want to say that, this part's a little bit trickier to understand. Reish, and even the Schottenstein says this is hard to understand exactly this question, so bear with me. Now, if the beginning part, it says, right, what happened? I said, oh, the man saw this get that someone else wrote and said, oh, my name's like your name, right? This is a case where both names match up, not just the women's, but the man and the woman's match up. And what do we see here? Now, again, we're going to say the same inference, according to what you're saying, right? The second guy can't take the first guy's get and use it. But harishon matze megarishba. But the first one can actually get divorced using it. Now, why? The hamlinan, but we don't, when it comes to the opposite case, we don't say the same thing. Below acher yachol otzi shtar chov alehem. Let's say you loaned me money, okay? Now you go to collect money from me. Remember, you have the shtar in your hand. You go to collect money from me, but I say, there's another Michelle Farber in the city. It's not me who owes the money. It's her. Now, you have no way to prove it, really, okay, unless you were smart and you figured out in the beginning how to prove it. But if, right, the way we used to do it is we used our middle initial, and that was a good way to do it, okay? But if you didn't use the middle initial, then you can't take out a shtar chov against me and claim I owe you money because I'm motzi mechavero alav haraya. Now, how this relates to the get is a little bit more complicated, but the point is that maybe he could say, it's the other guy's get, and you might have the get, but maybe you got it from the other guy and the other wife. And some people claim this has to do with money collection because she's trying to collect her k'tuba, and then she can't collect her k'tuba from him because he could claim, right, that this doesn't work. And our Mishna seems to say it does work. So why does it work if theoretically he could claim, why are you taking money from me? I didn't divorce you. It's someone else's. Okay. So exactly the comparison is a little bit tricky, but that's what he's trying in general. Overall, they're trying to say in the other direction, when the husband's name and the wife's name, it could really be the other couple. Again, what they're doing with the get is a good question, but again, they could say it fell on the floor and you can't take money out of me. So the only way to explain that case in the Mishnah, which then they're going to say is the way we explained the previous case, and that basically knocks out his question, or his inference, is to say, in other words, one tried to infer from here, you can say that motzim shtar chov alacherim, but right, Rav tried to infer that. He says you can't infer that because then you would infer the same thing from the second case, and it's the opposite. So what are we saying here? The only reason why this is effective is because there were aging that saw the get be given, and that's how they know who it is. We're not relying on the shtar to identify the people. No, we're relying on the witnesses who saw the shtar being given to her, the get. So, and Rabbi Elazar, and you'd have to say the Mishna's Rabbi Elazar. So just like in that case that I just mentioned, also in the previous case will be the same thing. Hachanami be'edim Mesiva Rabbi Elazar. Last thing for today. Amarav. Hulan psulim b'kuna chutz min harishon. Now going back to the Mishnah. We said in the Mishnah that any get shalom l'chav l'shum isha is pasul, which means it's no good. However, sometimes when we have a get that's pasul, we still say that the woman can't marry a kohen. A woman who's divorced can't marry a kohen. Even a woman who has what they call, the later commentators call it reach haget. Maybe it's even mentioned in the Gemara at some point. Reach haget is, it's like she had a get. It's like she's divorced because there was something of a divorce there, even though it wasn't effective. And then she can't marry a kohen at all. So now they're going to say, there's a big four-way machloka. We'll only see two opinions today about, is there a reach haget here? Are we going to disqualify her from marrying a kohen? And if so, for which cases? So the first opinion, we're going to, and again, are four cases. Rav says, Kulam poslim b'kuna, puts min harishon, other than the first one, because the first one wasn't even a get kritu. So it's not even considered even like a disqualified get. It's not even a get. Ushmuel amar, af rishon nami posel. Here's the most extreme opinion. All four of these women, if they got to get in this way, it's no good, but they can't marry a kohen. And now he's going to say, Az Shmuel Tameh, he goes according to his own approach, to Amar Shmuel, but in a different place, he says, Kol makom sheshanu chachamim get pasul, pasul posel. Anytime the rabbi said the get is disqualified, it's disqualified, and it disqualifies her from marrying a kohen. In other words, it functions in two ways. Number one, it's not really effective, but it is effective to make her disqualified. And not only that, but chalitza psula posel tamin achim. You might remember, if someone does chalitza with one of the, right, with the woman, she can no longer marry any of the brothers, right? That's because of lo yivneh. I'm not going to get into all the details there. Go back to Yavamot. But even if he does a problematic chalitza and it's not effective, it precludes any of the other brothers from ever doing yibum with this woman. Okay, even though she's now chayav in yibum still, but you can't do yibum, you have to do the chalitza, which is the undoing of yibum. Now, so b'marava amrei mishmei de Rabbi Elazar, in Eretz Yisrael, though, they distinguished. They said, depends what kind of psul. Small, the laila, psulot to puslot. If he does it with the left foot instead of the right foot, or he does it at night instead of during the day, it's supposed to be during the day, it actually disqualifies her from all the other brothers. But katan van pilia psulot and puslot. But if it's a minor, or if it's with a shoe that's not really a shoe, it's just a piece of cloth that he puts around his foot, that doesn't even disqualify her from the brothers, because that is so not chalitza. Why is that? Because Rashi says it's clear in the Torah you need ish and you need a na'al, you need a shoe. This is not a shoe, this is not a man. So therefore, it's so clear that it's not chalitza that it doesn't have any effect whatsoever. Okay, so review of today's stuff. We had two basic sugyot before we ended the chapter. One was about the women who aren't believed. And then we said we were trying to prove, was Abaye right or was Rav Yosef right? We proved Abaye from the Mishna and the braita. And then we proved Rav Yosef's answer, how kind of he reads the Mishna. Then we went into the woman who brings her get. We had a long-winded discussion about why on earth would this be happening and how could this actually be happening in an effective manner. And we finally came up with 2/3 answers, because the last one that got rejected only got rejected according to one understanding of one opinion. Then we got to these 4 cases of get that's not lishma. We talked about what's unique about each case, why was each one mentioned, and where each one is learned from, right? From which words in the psukim do we learn that each one is disqualified? Then we said, but however, even though it's not disqualified, still, right, we had this aside about, can we learn from here to promissory notes? And we basically say in the end, no, we can't, because this has nothing, this is all because of Ede Masira and not really because of the shtar itself, which for a promissory note, the shtar itself would be enough. And from there, we got to this last topic of, not from there, but after that, we got to this last topic of, does this disqualify women from marrying kohanim? Is there enough of some sort of get here to say this get disqualifies you, puts you in the category of a grusha, even though you're not really, but somewhat, okay? And then, as I said, we're going to see 4 opinions, and 2 we saw, 2 we're going to see, the other 2 we're going to see in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.